It's time for episode 20 of the Mystical Times blog podcast with me, Michelle Eve. This episode is about poltergeists, and I will share 3 poltergeist accounts, of which 2 happened on the same housing estate, and the 3rd that happened in Gloucestershire. Poltergeist is said to be a German word, which, when translated to English, means noisy ghost. Poltergeist cases can stop as suddenly as they start, and can be aggressive, with items being thrown, slammed or moved. Some cases involve disembodied voices. I've even heard about some cases where the poltergeist actions can be helpful. Whether this activity is caused by the unconscious mind of a human, or the ghosts of the dead, or even by some other yet unknown factor, these cases are so very intriguing. And don't forget, if you've had a spooky experience, then I want to hear about it. You can email me with your spooky experiences here, spooky@mysticaltimesblog.com. The Poltergeists of Pen Hill. The housing estate of Pen Hill in Swindon, Wiltshire, was built between the years 1952 to 1955 and was built to the town expanding, and it was to become an overflow town in which to house those mainly moving from the City of London. The area on which the estate was built had mainly been farmland. It was a spacious place to live when it was first built, and residents there seemed happy to class Pen Hill as their home. It was in 1973 when the BBC aired an episode of a programme called Leap in the Dark, Hauntings. The show was about the supernatural, and on this particular episode, it featured a young married couple, Dave and Cheryl Pellymounter, with their 3-year-old son Alan, who lived in a house on Westbury Road, Pen Hill. They had been experiencing poltergeist activity and had called in an exorcist to rid the house of whatever was causing this activity. The Pellymounters had witnessed their items being moved around, along with the feeling as though they were being watched. The radio was being switched on and off, as well as doors opening and shutting, as though by invisible hands. On the programme, Dave Pellymounter told of how he come home after work, then placed his wallet in his coat pocket, which he hung on a hook in the hallway, and went upstairs to wash himself. When he came down, his wallet was no longer in his coat pocket, so he retraced his steps and looked to see if it had fallen somewhere, but to no avail. He decided to look all over the house, and came to find it under the marital bed, even though he had only visited the bathroom, so it had gone from his coat pocket to under the bed. The strange and eerie goings-on tended to happen downstairs, especially in the hallway. Voices that were muttering would be heard there, and there would also be some rustling noises, as if some invisible persons were walking through the hallway. Their 3-year-old son, Alan, would be very afraid to walk through the hallway, and he would stand before it and just cry. The Pellymounters called in a local vicar, Father Walker, who then called upon the Canon Harmon from the local diocese to conduct an exorcism. The programme showed Canon Harmon performing the exorcism, and Dave Pellymounter said the temperature was very cold during it, and as it progressed, the temperature went back to normal. We now go on to the second poltergeist case that happened 7 years after the Pellymounter case and just half a mile away from the Pellymounters' house. It was 1980, and a teenage couple, Perry and Donna Bryce, lived on Melksham Close, Pen Hill. The young couple said the activity started as soon as they moved in with their 3-week-old daughter. The first morning they were woken up by their dog howling, and their back door was being banged upon as though someone was trying to get into the house. They also found that the loft door was fully opened and that the door of their pantry had been ripped of its hinges. One time, a friend was in the kitchen with Donna and they were making coffee, when all of a sudden, loud banging on the back door was heard. Again, it sounded as though someone was trying to get into the house. Both women fled in pure fear. The couple decided to sleep in the living room with their baby beside them in a cot. As they lay there trying to go to sleep, the light in the living room kept flashing on and off. As that was happening, a cassette recorder was witnessed levitating and then thrown 10 feet towards the baby's cot. The Bryces turned to the local council after the cassette recorder was thrown, as they felt whatever this force was, it might hurt their baby daughter. It was the council who said they would get an exorcism on the property and would also rehouse the young couple. It would appear rather strange that two houses within half a mile of each other had similar poltergeist activity. It might be suggested that whatever had been on the land before could have some reason as to why these houses had poltergeist activity. The Penhill estate was built on farmland, and it had been owned by the Merton Oxford College estate at one time. There was also a site of a wellhead on Inglesham Road that supplied the water for the local brewery. Inglesham Road is not far away from where the Pellymounters lived. There may have been some cottages on the land for the farm workers that were knocked down when the estate was being built. I did find two interesting and rather morbid accounts that happened when the land was farmland. An inquest was held in 1866 on the death of 19-year-old Elizabeth Legg. Elizabeth had been working as a domestic servant at the time of her death. She had put turpentine into an oven for the purpose of cleaning furniture. As she took the turps out of the oven, her clothes caught fire. She had rushed outside, screaming, and despite quick attendance in putting out the flames, she was to die from severe burns not long after the accident. Her death was recorded as accidental. Another person was to lose their life on the farmland too. It was in 1913, during the winter months at around 5:45 a.m, when a local man, Albert Kirby, who was a carter, came across a dark object lying under a hedge on Penhill Farm. Albert Kirby took a closer look at the object and was horrified to see it was a body of a man laying face down. Albert touched the body, and it was very cold, so he ran and sought the assistance of a police officer, and when they returned to where the dead body lay, a wagon was brought so that the body could be taken away to the mortuary at the local workhouse in nearby Stratton. The body was recognised at the workhouse as Thomas Pert, 52 years of age, and a watercress and mushroom vendor. Thomas Pert had no fixed address, and it had only been the week before that he had stayed at the workhouse on the casual ward. Thomas had had a varied life, joining the Gloucester Regiment as a young man, but after a while deserted the regiment. He had never married and spent most nights sleeping rough in barns, hedges, and occasionally the workhouse. The cause of death for him was exposure. Could these untimely deaths have anything to do with the poltergeist activity in both of these houses? I'll leave that up to you to decide. The Poltergeist House. During the years of 1963 to 1964, a semi-detached house in Chapel Street, Stow-on-the-Wold, Gloucestershire, was the scene of some very disturbing poltergeist activity. There was a family of 3 who resided in the property: Mr. Stanley Pethwick, his wife, Mrs. Nancy Pethwick, and their 14-year-old son, David. Published reports of the activity included pools of water appearing all over the house and even streams of water coming through the walls. When the water was mopped or wiped away, it would appear elsewhere in the house. Mr. and Mrs. Pethwick called in 3 plumbers to try and sort out the water issues, but to no avail. Even when the most experienced person from the water board came to inspect the property, no resolution could be found. It was when the water began to regularly show up in the kitchen that the tapping noises began. It would come from the insides of cupboards and have a rhythm to it. Writing also began to appear on the walls, but I have not been able to discover what was written. David would regularly be tipped out of his bed. Gouges in his headboard were also found. Sheets would be ripped up, and even a dressing gown flew off his bedroom door where it had been hanging and was stuffed under his mattress. Furniture in the house began moving on its own, and with this activity happening, a male voice was heard, telling the Pethwicks that he had been one of the builders who built the house and that he had died 20 years ago on February the 15th. This voice was only heard when David was around. One night, Mr. and Mrs. Pethwick were in their son's bedroom when Mrs. Pethwick's eyes were drawn to the end of her son's bed. She saw a tiny baby's hand, which grew into an adult male-sized hand right before her eyes. Mr. Pethwick also witnessed this weird event. The Pethwicks decided to go on holiday to Devon, thinking they would get respite from this poltergeist activity, but unfortunately the poltergeist activity followed them there. The Pethwicks found a local church, but even then, the tappings of the poltergeist could be heard throughout the church building. For whatever reason, after that visit to the church, there was no more poltergeist activity. The Pethwicks returned to their home, and all was calm, as it seemed the poltergeist stayed in Devon. That's all for episode 20 of the Mystical Times blog podcast, and I do hope you enjoyed those poltergeist accounts. For the next episode, episode 21, I'll be sharing some more time slip experiences with you. Till next time.